I get to be in the studio with Chris Smither, and it's been a few years, Chris, since you've been here. Welcome back to Minnesota.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about your new record, All About the Bones, which is album number 20, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what they tell me. It seems hard to believe.
Tell me about All About the Bones. You've got, I know there's at least, 8, 10 originals on there, and a couple of covers, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 8 originals, 2 covers. And I like to do covers. I mean, I don't normally do include a cover or 2 in there. I just like to show people where I see myself. You know, it's an interesting concept of, I don't. It's a way of just telling people how I fit in my own mind.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, it was an interesting project. It all came together in a hurry. I had a year to do it. I'd thought ahead, thought to myself, okay, I'll be ready to record by June of 23, something like that. And by June of 23, I had exactly 1 song. David Goodrich, my producer, calls me up. Goody says, "Are you worried?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Me too." I'm coming up. And that's a we've been working together for over 25 years, and everybody needs somebody like that who is a catalyst for them, and he is that for me. It's like I've often said, he walks into the room, everything changes. Usually for the better.
And you've been working with him, as you said, for a while now.
Yeah.
What else does he bring to the session with you? I mean, he inspires creativity.
He's a multi-instrumentalist.
Yes.
He's a fabulous player.
Yes.
And he brings a sensibility. From the first time that I worked with him, I realized I felt this is somebody who understands what I'm trying to do. I may not be able to actually do it, but he understands where the effort is pointed, and can direct it. He never steps on what I'm doing. He keeps what I'm doing front, because normally with few exceptions, I perform on my own, just by myself. Mm-hmm. And he wants to make sure that sort of integral arrangement, my personal orchestration, is apparent within the production. And so the production is all surrounding and amplifying that, as opposed to sort of taking front and center.
Does he start by recording you solo and then adding other
We'd usually,
instruments?
if we've got percussion, we usually do it with the drums, and it's very minimal percussion on this record, but it was great. Zach Trajano he's just got a great feel. He doesn't like any metal. I like that too. When we do the basic tracks, he never uses cymbals. There are some cymbal touches and hits, but they're all overdubbed, and very minimal. He just sits there with basically 2 drums, a kick and a very small kick at that. It's actually just a box, I think, and a snare, and it works with different. Yeah, it's just very basic stuff. And we sit there just about as close as I am to you right now, and we can look at each other and nod and sort of get that groove, that feeling, and he fits right in. And then once we got a take down, and it doesn't usually take very long, 1 or 2 takes.
Yeah.
Almost everybody involved is ready. They come in, they know what they're doing. And
where did you record this?
This is recorded at Sonolab in East Hampton, Massachusetts. Okay. I never worked there before. I worked once before with the engineer. He owns the studio, and his background is mostly rock and roll, and it put a whole other feel to the record. And I look for that. I mean, I look for something a little bit different on every record, and the sonic fingerprint, shall we say, of this record is a little more edgy, than some of them.
Yeah. But you spent a good part of your formative years in New Orleans.
Yeah, most of them, in fact.
Yeah, I'm curious about that, because did you ever? I mean, that city has so much music in it. It just breathes music.
Yeah.
How did that influence you as an up and coming musician, folk singer?
Well, that's a question I get all the time. I even wrote a song about it once.
Of course you did.
It's just what I do. I'm not really, the way that the city influenced me is more apparent to other people than it is to me.
Okay.
And other people claim to be able to see it. And you tell them you're from New Orleans, and they go, "Oh, well, no wonder." And I think, no wonder what, but nobody bothers to explain that part to me. But, I think it's more of an attitude than any actual musical techniques or characteristics that you could point your finger at. It's an attitude that music is everywhere. And you should feel free to express yourself that way anytime you want. Just walking down the street, nobody's going to blink if you burst into song.
On the street corner or wherever.
Yeah.
That's what I love about that city. You can just walk anywhere and always find great music.
Yeah, yeah. I discovered as a musician, New Orleans is a great town to be from.
I see.
I'm not so sure I want to live there. I mean, there's a certain amount of charming dysfunction to the town,
Sure.
that drives you crazy if you think of yourself as a responsible citizen.
If you're from New Orleans.
Yeah, but I dearly love the town. I love what goes on there, and I still have. Well, I got a lot of classmates from high school that are still there,
Wow.
and I see them, and I try to get down. Jazz Fest brings me down every 4 or 5 years, when they're getting back down to their beginnings. That's how they describe it.
I'm talking with Chris Smither about his album, All About the Bones. As I mentioned, this is album number 20, and there's several best-ofs out there as well. What's next for you? You turn 80. A big number this fall, 80 in November, right?
Yeah, 80 this November. I don't answer that question anymore.
Okay.
And I did, up to this record. I said, "Oh yeah, I think I got one more," and there may be another one, but I don't know, and I'm not going to commit to it. It creates all sorts of. We'll see. We'll see. I feel great. If it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
But I did. What's next is just a month ago. This came in over the transom. A director in Los Angeles called me, and he was doing a short film, and they'd lost one of their leads. They said, "Can you come do that?" And so anyway, to make a long story short, one of my first experiences in film, and I went out, and it was a real boot in the pants. I loved it. I mean, it was such a kick.
What was your role?
I'm a singer. The short is called The Singers. It's based on a short story by Turgenev, a Russian writer from 19th century. And in the original story, it takes place in a tavern in the middle of 19th century Russia, with a bunch of serfs trying to forget their miserable existence. And a couple of them are singers, and they have a singing competition. The prize is a big tankard of beer. And it's a very odd story. I mean, you can read it in 20 minutes. It's The Singers by Turgenev. And this is a modern take on it. It takes place in some dive bar, not specified where, maybe early 80s, something like that. Full of smoke, everybody's smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, trying to forget their miserable lives, and a singing competition develops between 4 or 5 people, and I'm one of the competitors.
Got it. Okay.
But I don't play Chris Smither. I'm just a singer in the bar, a guy who sings, or apparently used to sing a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm sick. I've got, oxygen cannula up my nose. I'm carrying around an oxygen tank, but it is, I'm so thrilled to have been a part of it. I love the guys that were working on it. The director's name is Sam Davis, and he's well known. And
the movie is what again?
The Singers.
The Singers. Of course.
Yeah, I know they're hopeful that it'll be at Sundance this year.
Yeah. Since the last time we talked, we lost a mutual friend. Billy Conway passed away. Billy played drums with you a number of times and with a number of musicians who have been through the studio. He's a Minnesota native. Got any good stories about Billy?
Oh, a ton of them, and they won't come to me right now, of course. But, I loved him. He was, my sister met him for the first time and was very impressed at one point, And so when we got off by ourselves, she said to me, "Tell me about Billy Conway." And I said, "Billy Conway is a prince."
Yeah.
And she said, "What do you mean by that, a prince?" I said, "Somebody who just makes you feel good to be around him." And that was him. Wonderful percussionist, always in service to the song. And one of the things that I loved about him was that you'd sit down and work on a tune with him, come back to it later, and maybe your time was off, your sense of where the groove was for the song, and he always remembered. And he'd bring you right back to it.
Wow.
Say, "No, this is what we were doing," And it was
cool.
And very unobtrusive, but he would just seep in through the cracks and hold everything in place. It was great.
Yeah.
Lovely man.
Chris, thank you for coming in today.
Oh, sure.
Congratulations on your latest album. It's all about the bones.
Yeah, it is.
And here's to many more.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
The Current is public media made possible thanks to member support.